Alright, tonight we're heading back into the rugged world of the mountain men. But before we set off, make sure you're comfortable. Really comfortable. Grab your pillow, pull that blanket up and get cozy. You'll want to feel safe and warm for where we're going. And hey, where are you all tuning in from tonight? Maybe there are some fellow Mountain Man fans right near you. In the frozen wilderness of Montana, 1834, where neighbors lived 100 miles apart and morning commutes consisted of mountain ridge trails, the legendary trappers known as mountain men carved out their harsh existence. These remarkable individuals possessed skills that kept them alive in America's most unforgiving landscapes, abilities that modern civilization has long forgotten. Among these weathered veterans of the frontier stood Moses Harris, known to most as Black Harris. At 40-something years old, with a beard like steel wool and hands as gnarled as oak roots, Harris had become a legend among trappers. Stories claimed he had once killed 3 Blackfoot warriors with just his skinning knife after they ambushed him. This winter, he had taken on an unusual burden, training a young greenhorn in the ways of the mountains. The apprentice, known simply as Will Green, had been fortunate enough to fall under Harris's wing during his first season in the mountains. As dawn broke over their crude winter camp, the silence was absolute, a stillness that made every breath seem thunderous. Frost sparkled inside their makeshift shelter, filtering through the smoke hole above like scattered diamonds. Will lay on a bed of pine boughs covered with a buffalo robe, his rifle within arm's reach. His back ached from the uneven ground beneath him, a far cry from any comfortable eastern bed. The wilderness offered only the barest separation between man and the frozen earth. "Rise and shine, greenhorn," Harris's gruff voice called from outside. "Beaver ain't going to trap themselves." Will mumbled a response, his throat dry from the smoky air inside his brush shelter. Rolling onto his side, every muscle protested the movement. His shelter wasn't much, just a simple lean-to made of branches and pine boughs, but compared to sleeping under the open sky, it felt like a palace. He had built it in less than an hour using skills Harris had taught him. Mountain men could throw up basic shelters in minutes, a critical ability when weather turned deadly without warning. His clothes from yesterday hung frozen stiff where he had left them to dry. With resignation, Will pulled them on anyway, the fabric cracking as it bent. They would thaw and soften with his body heat soon enough. Modern outdoor gear would have been a miracle here, but he made do with what he had. Buckskin pants, a wool shirt, and a fur-lined capote coat. Outside, the world was painted in silver and blue. Though no thermometer existed yet, Will guessed it was perhaps 15 degrees below zero. His breath streamed away like dragon smoke. Harris already had a small fire going, melting snow in a blackened coffee pot. "Thought you might sleep till spring," Harris said, not looking up from the fire. "Coffee will be ready soon. Best drink in creation, especially when it's cold enough to freeze the balls off a brass monkey." Will grunted in response, still not fully awake. The smell of the coffee was heavenly, rich and bitter and promising warmth. Most mountain men considered coffee a necessity, not a luxury. Some would go without food before they'd go without coffee. It provided not just warmth and energy, but a psychological comfort that was hard to find in the wilderness. "Got 6 traps to check before we set new ones," Harris said, pouring the steaming coffee into a tin cup and handing it to Will. "Rivers running high from yesterday's melt. Got to be careful." Will nodded, wrapping his hands around the hot metal. The warmth seeped into his frozen fingers, almost painful but welcome. He lifted the cup to his lips and took a cautious sip. It was strong enough to stand a spoon in. Mountain coffee, not the delicate brew from some city cafe. It was perfect. "Eat," Harris said, tossing him a strip of jerky. "Need your strength." The jerky was tough as old leather, requiring serious jaw strength to tear off a piece. It was elk meat dried months ago and hard as wood. Will tucked it into his cheek to soften while he sipped more coffee. This was breakfast on the frontier. No pancakes, no eggs. Just meat and coffee. Sometimes pemmican, if they were lucky. That dense mixture of dried meat, fat, and berries that could keep a man alive through the harshest conditions. "Saw wolf tracks yesterday about a quarter-mile downstream," Harris mentioned casually, as if discussing the weather. "Big pack. 10, maybe 12. Will's stomach tightened. Wolves weren't usually a threat to armed men, but a hungry winter pack was unpredictable. Harris read his expression and snorted. "Don't worry so much, boy. Wolves got better sense than to tangle with us. They're after the same thing we are, food." He kicked dirt over the fire, extinguishing it with practiced efficiency. Speaking of which, daylight's wasting. The morning air scoured their lungs as they followed Harris through the snow. Each step crunched loudly, breaking the pristine silence. Will's rifle, a Hawken, the mountain man's weapon of choice, felt reassuringly solid in his hands. The Hawken wasn't just a gun, it was a lifeline. Unlike the Kentucky long rifles most settlers carried, the Hawken was shorter, more durable, and packed a bigger punch, perfect for the mountainous terrain and large game of the Rockies. "First rule of trapping," Harris said over his shoulder, "know your beaver, know where they dam, where they feed, where they enter the water." Will had heard this lecture before, but he listened anyway. In the mountains, repetition was how knowledge got hammered into a person's brain, and that knowledge kept them alive. "Beavers are creatures of habit," Harris continued. "They use the same runs, same paths to and from the water. That's where you set your trap." The river came into view, a dark ribbon cutting through the white landscape. Parts of it were frozen, but the center flowed black and fast. Harris pointed to a section of bank where a small creek emptied into the main river. "See there, that fallen birch? Beaver been chewing on it fresh too. Look at the color of the wood." Will followed his gaze and noticed the pale yellow of freshly exposed wood where the bark had been gnawed away. It was impressive that Harris spotted it from this distance. "Okay, first trap," Harris announced as they reached a narrow point in the river. He knelt and brushed away snow, revealing a chain disappearing into the water. With practiced movements, he pulled the chain, drawing up a metal contraption from beneath the surface. A Newhouse No. 4 beaver trap, the industry standard, and in its jaws a large beaver, drowned and ready for skinning. Got one? Will couldn't help but feel excited. Each beaver meant money, and money meant supplies, ammunition, and eventually, if he was lucky, enough to buy land somewhere. "Good placement," Harris nodded approvingly. He took out his skinning knife, a tool as important to a trapper as his rifle. "Watch close now. Got to do this right or you'll ruin the pelt." With swift, precise movements, Harris began to skin the beaver. His knife slid between fur and flesh, separating the valuable pelt from the carcass with minimal damage. It was gruesome but fascinating, the methodical way he worked, never wasting a motion. "Trick is to keep the knife edge up, away from the hide," he explained. "Nick the pelt and you lose value. Trading post ain't going to pay full price for damaged goods." The wet, meaty smell filled Will's nostrils as Harris worked. It wasn't pleasant, but it was a smell he'd grown accustomed to. This was his life now. Blood, and fur and survival. "You'll do the next one," Harris said, finishing up and rolling the pelt fur side in. He tucked it into his possibles bag, the leather satchel where trappers kept essential items. Meat's good eating too, we'll take some back to camp. They moved on to the next trap location, navigating the treacherous riverbank. One wrong step could mean a plunge into freezing water, a potential death sentence out here. Hypothermia could kill faster than any predator, especially when help might be days or weeks away. "Hold up," Harris suddenly froze, his hand raised in warning. Will stopped instantly, scanning the area for danger. "Grizzly," Harris whispered, pointing to a set of massive tracks in the snow. "Big male from the size. Passed through maybe an hour ago." Will's heart hammered against his ribs. Grizzlies were the undisputed kings of the Rockies, capable of killing a man with a single swipe. Even experienced mountain men feared them. "What do we do?" Will whispered back. "We stay alert," Harris said simply, "and we make noise. Grizzly don't want to meet us any more than we want to meet him. Most bears that kill men do it because they got surprised." Harris began to talk louder as they continued, occasionally shouting or singing snatches of bawdy songs. Will joined in, feeling slightly foolish, but not foolish enough to question Harris's wisdom. At the second trap site, they found another beaver. As promised, Harris watched as Will attempted to skin it. His first cuts were hesitant, unsure. "Commit to the cut," Harris advised. "Timid knife makes a mess. Be bold, but careful." Will adjusted his grip and tried again, focusing on keeping the blade away from the fur. It was harder than Harris made it look, but he managed to remove most of the pelt intact. Harris inspected his work with a critical eye. "Not bad for a greenhorn," he conceded. "You'll get better or you'll starve. Mountain has a way of teaching quick lessons." The next two traps were empty, and the fifth had been sprung without catching anything. Harris reset them with expert efficiency, showing Will how to position the trap on a beaver run and secure it properly. "Trap's got to be underwater," he explained, "deep enough that the beaver drowns quick. Otherwise the poor bastard might chew his own leg off to escape. Seen it happen. Beaver with 3 legs are wily as the devil himself." For bait, Harris pulled out a small wooden container from his possibles bag. Inside was a dark, pungent substance. Castoreum, the oil from a beaver's scent gland mixed with various ingredients. "Smells like hell, but beavers can't resist it," he grinned, dabbing a small amount on a stick positioned above the reset trap. "Think of it like putting up a no trespassing sign in beaver language. They come to investigate," and he made a snapping motion with his hands. The last trap yielded another beaver, a small one, but still valuable. Will helped Harris reset it, trying to mimic his precise movements. The metal was ice cold, numbing his fingers despite his leather gloves. How these men worked through winter with primitive gear seemed almost superhuman. "Now that's all for checking," Harris announced. "Now we set new ones upstream." Will followed him as Harris scouted new locations, studying the banks for signs of beaver activity. Gnawed trees, slides where beavers entered the water, and the remains of dams. It was detective work, reading the subtle signs most people would miss entirely. "There!" Harris pointed to a narrow channel between 2 small islands. "Perfect spot. Beavers got to swim through there to reach that stand of aspens they've been feeding on." Harris waded into the frigid water, seemingly unbothered by the cold that would send most men into shock. Mountain men developed an almost supernatural tolerance for discomfort. Or perhaps they just accepted it as the cost of freedom. "Trick is to disguise the human scent," Harris explained, dipping the trap in mud before setting it. "Beavers got a nose that had put a bloodhound to shame." Will helped place 3 more traps in strategic locations, his hands numb and clumsy from the cold. By the time they finished, the sun had climbed higher, warming the air slightly but doing little to thaw his frozen extremities. Should head back, Harris decided, studying the sky. Weather's turning. Will looked up and noticed dark clouds gathering over the western peaks. In the mountains, weather changed with terrifying speed. A clear morning could become a deadly blizzard by afternoon. How can you tell? Will asked, seeing nothing obviously threatening in the clouds. Harris tapped his nose. Smell it. Air's got that metallic taste. Snow's coming. Big storm too. Best be back at camp when it hits. Will strained his senses but detected nothing unusual. Still, he'd learned to trust Harris's instincts. The mountain men developed a sixth sense for weather patterns. They had to. Being caught unprepared could be fatal. The trek back to camp was more difficult, laden down with beaver pelts and meat. The temperature dropped noticeably as clouds rolled in, blocking the sun. Their earlier tracks were already partially filled with fresh snow. Pace yourself, Harris advised when he noticed Will breathing hard. Sweat's your enemy in cold. Get wet. Get dead. It was a common saying among mountain men. In sub-zero temperatures, sweat-soaked clothing could freeze, rapidly lowering body temperature. Many an inexperienced trapper had died not from starvation or animal attacks, but from the simple mistake of overexertion, followed by rest in frigid conditions. When we get back, Harris said, I'll show you how to stretch and prepare those pelts. Got to do it right or they'll rot. This was the unglamorous side of trapping, the meticulous preparation of furs that took hours of careful work. Each pelt had to be stretched on a willow hoop or board, scraped clean of fat and flesh, and properly dried. Any mistake in the process could ruin the fur's value. How many you reckon you need to make it through winter? Harris asked. Will considered the question. Each beaver pelt fetched roughly $3 at the trading posts, a significant sum in the 1830s, but supplies were expensive as the mountains where everything had to be hauled in by mule train. 100 maybe, Will ventured. Harris snorted. Try 200 minimum, and that's if you're frugal. Winter's long up here, longer than you can imagine. The implication was clear. Will needed to work faster, trap more efficiently. His survival depended on it. No welfare, no safety net, just his skills and determination standing between him and starvation. Camp came into view just as the first snowflakes began to fall. They'd been out since dawn, and Will's body ached with fatigue, but there was no rest yet. The pelts needed attention, firewood needed gathering, and food needed preparing. The work of survival never ended. Good morning's work, Harris said as Will dropped his load of pelts near the fire pit. You're learning. Might make a mountain man of you yet. From Harris, this qualified as high praise. Will felt a surge of pride despite his exhaustion. He was adapting, surviving in a world that killed the weak and unprepared. His hands might be bloody, his muscles might scream in protest, but he was alive in the mountains. That was victory enough. Now, Harris said, pulling out his skinning knife again, let me show you how to turn these green hides into something a man can sell. The snow fell harder as he began the demonstration. But inside their crude shelter, with fire warming his face and hard-earned pelts at his feet, Will felt something unexpected. Contentment. This life was brutal and unforgiving, but there was a raw honesty to it that he'd never found in civilization. As Harris worked, he began to tell stories of his years as the mountains, tales of narrow escapes, of great rendezvous where hundreds of trappers gathered to trade and celebrate, of winters so harsh they had to eat their moccasins to survive. 1824. Winter came early, Harris recalled, his knife never stopping its methodical scraping. Got caught up near the Yellowstone with nothing but my rifle and the clothes on my back. Snow up to my armpits, no shelter, no food. Thought I was done for. Will leaned in, captivated despite his fatigue. These stories with the oral history of the mountains passed from veteran to greenhorn, carrying the hard-won wisdom that kept men alive. "What happened?" Will prompted when Harris fell silent. Harris grinned, revealing a gap where 2 teeth should be. "Found a bear den. Bear was hibernating, fat as a priest after Easter. Well, one of us wasn't going to see spring." He shrugged. "I'm still here." Will couldn't help but laugh at his matter-of-fact delivery. This was mountain man humour. Dark, understated, and laced with the constant awareness of mortality. The snowfall thickened outside, creating a white curtain around their small camp. But they were prepared. Shelter secure, fire burning, food available. Harris had taught Will well these past months. Tomorrow would bring more traps to check, more beaver to skin, more challenges to overcome. But tonight, as the wilderness disappeared under a blanket of white, Will had earned his place in this harsh, beautiful world. His hands might be stained with blood and his body weary beyond words, but he was becoming something new, a man of the mountains, tested by nature and found worthy. The soft hiss of snow falling on the fire created a gentle rhythm as Harris continued his story. Unlike modern bedrooms with their artificial silence, this wilderness night was alive with subtle sounds, the crackle of flames, the whisper of wind, the occasional crack of a branch surrendering to the weight of snow. Will felt his eyelids growing heavy, but he fought to stay awake, to absorb every scrap of knowledge Harris offered. In this world, such knowledge wasn't academic, it was survival. Every skill learned, every story heard might someday be the difference between life and death. As night fully claimed the sky, turning the snowfall into a dance of shadows and firelight, Will realized that for all its dangers and discomforts, there was a profound peace to this life. No deadlines, no traffic, no endless notifications demanding attention. Just the immediate needs of existence and the vast, indifferent beauty of the mountains. Harris fell silent, his story complete, his work on the pelts finished for now. He poured another cup of coffee, adding a splash of something stronger from a small flask, his precious supply of whiskey saved for special occasions or particularly cold nights. "Get some rest," Harris advised, noticing Will's struggle to stay awake. "Tomorrow's another day. Beaver ain't going nowhere." As Will settled into his bedroll, muscles aching and mind full of new knowledge, he understood why men chose this life despite its hardships. There was a clarity here, a purpose uncluttered by the complexities of civilization. Each day presented simple questions with profound consequences. Will you eat? Will you stay warm? Will you survive until tomorrow? Outside, the storm intensified, but inside their shelter, wrapped in buffalo hide and warmed by the dying fire, Will felt an unexpected security. The modern world, with its countless comforts, seemed impossibly distant, like a half-remembered dream. This was reality now, immediate, demanding, and somehow more authentic than anything he'd known before. Sleep came swiftly, carrying him away from aching muscles and bloody hands to dreams of beaver streams and mountain valleys yet unexplored. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he rested like the mountain men of old, deeply, completely, with the simple satisfaction of having survived another day in the unforgiving embrace of the wild. Morning came with the smell of smoke and coffee. The storm had passed sometime in the night, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Everything gleamed bright enough to hurt the eyes. Will rolled over in his bedroll, every muscle screaming in protest. "Up and at 'em, greenhorn," Harris kicked the bottom of his buffalo robe. "Got company coming." Will bolted upright, hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. "Blackfoot?" he asked, fear tightening his voice. Harris snorted. "Nah, Crow. Friendly enough long as you don't get handsy with their women or horses." He tossed Will a strip of jerky. "Eat up. Trading's hungry work." Will forced himself to chew the leathery meat while pulling on his still damp moccasins. The previous day's trapping had left his hands raw and blistered, but there was no time to coddle himself. In the mountains, pain was just another daily companion, like hunger and cold. "How do you know they're coming?" Will asked, seeing no signs of visitors. Harris tapped his ear. "Listen." Will strained to hear past the crackling fire and the soft hiss of melting snow dripping from tree branches. Then he caught it. The distant jingle of metal, bells or tin cones sewn onto clothing, a common decoration among many tribes. "They'll be here soon," Harris said, adding more wood to the fire. "Best look busy. Crow respect men who work." Will set about stretching the beaver pelts from yesterday onto willow hoops, a task that required both strength and delicacy. The skin must be stretched tight enough to dry properly, but not so tight it tears. His fingers, stiff from cold, struggled with the intricate work. "So what do we trade?" Will asked, fighting with a particularly stubborn piece of hide. "Whatever they want that we can spare," Harris replied, checking his own supply of trade goods. Beads, awls, small mirrors, and a few precious steel knives. Might be they want coffee or tobacco. Might be they just want news. He paused, fixing Will with a serious stare. "Listen close, because this might save your life someday. When Indians come to trade, it ain't just about swapping goods. It's about respect. Building a bond. You rush it. Treat them like they're just walking trading posts. You'll end up with your hair hanging from somebody's lodgepole." Will nodded, absorbing the lesson. Mountain men who survived long-term had to be diplomats as well as trappers. The wilderness was native territory, and a man alone couldn't afford to make enemies. "First thing is the gift," Harris continued. "You always offer something before trading starts. Something good, not just leftovers. Shows goodwill." "What if I don't have anything to spare?" Will asked. Harris chuckled darkly. "Then you better hope they like your jokes, 'cause your scalp ain't worth much." Before Will could respond, the sound of approaching horses became unmistakable. Harris straightened up, adjusting his possibles bag and checking that his knife and pistol were accessible, but not prominently displayed. A subtle gesture told Will to do the same. "Let me do the talking," Harris muttered, "at least at first." The Crow arrived like a painting come to life. 8 riders on painted ponies, their hair adorned with feathers, their clothing a riot of colours and intricate beadwork. Unlike the fringed buckskins depicted in dime novels, these men wore a practical mix of traditional dress and traded goods. Several sported wool blankets draped over shoulders, and one had a US Army coat modified with quill work and beads. Their leader, distinguished by an impressive headdress of eagle feathers, raised his hand in greeting. "How, Black Harris?" he called in heavily accented English. "How? 2 moons," Harris responded, using the universal plains greeting. He raised his hand palm forward in the gesture of peace. "Been a long winter." 2 moons dismounted with fluid grace. His face was weathered, but his eyes sharp and intelligent. The other warriors remained on horseback, watching Will with undisguised curiosity. "New face," 2 moons nodded toward Will. "Your son?" Harris laughed. "Nah, just teaching him how not to die. Names." He turned to Will expectantly. "William," Will supplied, then remembering mountain man custom added Will Green. 2 moons studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Good name, easy to say. Among trappers and tribes alike, a simple name that could be pronounced by many tongues was an advantage." Harris reached into his bag and pulled out a small pouch of tobacco. his prized Virginia blend carefully rationed through the winter. "For you, old friend," he said, offering it to Two Moons with both hands. "Best smoke this side of St. Louis." The Crow leader accepted the gift with appropriate ceremony, sniffing the tobacco appreciatively. "Good medicine," he pronounced. Then from within his own robe he produced a small parfleche, a rawhide container decorated with geometric designs. "For you, buffalo tongue my wife made." Harris accepted the gift with evident pleasure. Preserved buffalo tongue was considered a delicacy, rich and flavorful compared to the monotonous diet of jerky and whatever game could be hunted. "Your woman makes the best," Harris said, tucking the parfleche away carefully. "Please thank her for me." The formal exchange of gifts complete, the atmosphere relaxed perceptibly. Two Moons gestured and his men dismounted, coming to warm themselves by the fire. One young warrior continued to stare at Will with particular intensity. "That's walks far," Harris murmured to Will. "First war party last fall. Took 2 Blackfoot scalps. He's looking to add to his count, so don't stare back too hard." Will swallowed nervously and busied himself with the pelts. Despite Harris's assurances that the Crow were allies, the tension was palpable. These men were formidable warriors in their own right, capable of killing with terrifying efficiency if provoked. Two Moons spoke rapidly in Crow to his men, who produced various items for trade. Beautifully tanned hides, moccasins sewn with colourful quill work, and several bags of pemmican. The real trading was about to begin. "Watch and learn," Harris advised. "Trading's got its own language." What followed was a masterclass in frontier diplomacy. Harris never showed too much interest in any item, no matter how valuable. He examined each offering casually, making non-committal noises. Two Moons did the same with Harris's trade goods. Both men knew exactly what they wanted, but the protocol must be observed. "This knife," Two Moons finally said, picking up one of Harris's steel blades. "Good metal." "Best Sheffield steel," Harris confirmed. "Hold an edge better than any other." The Crow leader tested the blade with his thumb, nodding appreciatively. "What you want for this?" Harris shrugged. "That buffalo robe looks warm." Two Moons laughed. "This robe worth 3 knives. Very fine work, my youngest wife." And so the haggling began in earnest. Back and forth they went, each man praising his own goods while finding fault with the others. It was a dance, a ritual as important as the actual exchange of items. Will watched, fascinated, as Harris traded 3 steel needles for a pair of beautifully beaded moccasins, then a small mirror for a substantial bag of pemmican. Each transaction was punctuated by stories, jokes, and subtle compliments. Never was the trading rushed. Each item received its due consideration. "Your turn," Harris suddenly said, nudging Will forward. "Two Moons wants to see what you've got." Panic fluttered in Will's chest. He hadn't prepared for this. Frantically, he searched his meagre possessions for something worth trading. His fingers closed around his spare knife. Not his best, but decent quality. "I have this," Will offered, holding it out to Two Moons. The Crow leader took it, examining the blade carefully. His face gave nothing away. "Good knife," he finally pronounced. "What you want for it?" Will scanned the items the Crow had brought. There was a beautiful quilled belt that caught his eye, but he sensed it was worth far more than his knife. Instead, he pointed to a smaller item, a leather pouch filled with what looked like dried berries. "What are those?" he asked. "Choke cherries," Two Moons replied. "Good medicine for winter sickness. Make tea." Will nodded, trying to appear knowledgeable. "I would trade my knife for that." Two Moons considered, then nodded. "Fair trade. You know how to use." When Will hesitated, Two Moons explained, "Boil in water, drink when sick, good for cough, good for belly." Will accepted the pouch, feeling oddly proud of completing his first trade. Harris gave him an approving nod when Two Moons wasn't looking. The trading continued for another hour, a leisurely process interspersed with conversation and the sharing of news. Will learned that a party of American Fur Company men had been attacked by Blackfoot 2 moons ago, losing 3 trappers and most of their winter take. The Crow themselves had skirmished with Sioux war parties pushing into their hunting grounds. 2 of their young men had been killed, a serious blow to a small band. "Bad sign," 2 Moons said gravely. "Sioux moving west, many guns, many warriors." Harris nodded, equally serious. "Government pushing them from the east. Everybody's getting squeezed." This was the reality of the changing frontier. Tribes being displaced by white settlement pushed into other tribes' territories, creating a deadly domino effect of conflict. The mountain men, caught in the middle, had to navigate these complex tribal politics just to survive. "You hunt beaver?" 2 Moons asked, eyeing their stretched pelts. "Some," Harris replied cautiously. Beaver trapping was a sensitive subject with many tribes who increasingly recognized that the mountain men were depleting a valuable resource. 2 Moons made a sweeping gesture toward the mountains. "Our hunting grounds, many beaver. You trap, you trade with us. Yes? No take to fort." Harris didn't commit immediately. "Your beaver, your territory," he acknowledged. "But the company expects pelts." "Company not here," 2 Moons pointed out reasonably. "We here, Blackfoot here." The implication was clear. The Crow were offering protection in exchange for first rights to trade. "We can work something out," Harris conceded. "Some for you, some for the fort." 2 Moons nodded, satisfied with this compromise. More words were exchanged, arrangements made for future meetings. Throughout it all, Will observed the careful balance Harris maintained. Respectful but not subservient, friendly but not overly familiar. It was diplomatic tightrope walking of the highest order. As the trading wound down, one of the younger Crow, not walks far but another whose name Will didn't catch, approached him directly. He pointed to Will's rifle, then to himself, making his interest clear. "He wants to see your Hawken," Harris translated unnecessarily. Will hesitated. A man's rifle was his life out here, not something casually handed over to strangers, but refusing could be taken as an insult. "Just let him look," Harris advised quietly. "Don't give it to him loaded." Carefully, Will checked that the rifle was unloaded before passing it to the young warrior. He accepted it with reverent hands, admiring the octagonal barrel and the brass fittings. His fingers traced the wooden stock, worn smooth by use. "Good medicine," he said in halting English. "Kill buffalo far away." Will nodded. "Yes, good for buffalo, good for elk." The warrior raised the rifle to his shoulder, sighting along the barrel toward a distant tree. His form was perfect, clearly familiar with firearms. After a moment, he handed it back to Will with obvious reluctance. "Someday I get rifle like this," he said. "Trade many horses." Will nodded, understanding his desire. For the Plains tribes, adopting firearms wasn't just about having better weapons. It was about survival in a changing world. Those without guns were increasingly at the mercy of those who had them. 2 Moons gave a command and his men began mounting up. The trading was over. As a final gesture, the Crow leader approached Will directly. "You trap with Black Harris. You learn good," he said. "But remember, mountains have many eyes. Blackfoot not like beaver trappers. They kill quick." He drew a finger across his throat to emphasize the point. "You see strange tracks. You come to our village." He pointed east. 3 days' ride, yellow clay cliffs. We help. "Thank you," Will replied, genuinely moved by the offer of protection. 2 Moons nodded, then turned to Harris. "Snow melting soon. Big water coming. Be careful at river crossing." With that warning delivered, He mounted his horse with fluid grace. The crow band departed as they had arrived, in a jingle of metal ornaments and a flash of colourful blankets against the snow. Within minutes, they had disappeared into the trees. "Well," Harris said, settling back by the fire, "that was educational." "They seemed friendlier than I expected," Will admitted. Harris snorted. "Of course they were. We're on their good side. You should see them when they're not feeling so charitable." He tapped his chest where a barely visible scar peeked above his shirt collar. "Got this from a crow arrow about 10 years back. Misunderstanding about some horses." Will swallowed hard. "But you said they were allies." "They are now," Harris shrugged. "Out here, alliances shift like river sand. Today's friend might be tomorrow's enemy, depending on who's got what and who's threatening whom." He poked at the fire thoughtfully. "Two Moons is solid, though. Man of his word. If he says we can trap his territory and trade with his band, he'll stick to it." Will digested this information, understanding better now the complex web of relationships that kept a mountain man alive. It wasn't just about skills and courage. It was about knowing who to trust, when to trade, and how to navigate the human terrain of the frontier. "What he said about the Blackfoot," Will began. Wasn't exaggerating," Harris finished grimly. "They hate trappers worse than poison. Blame us for bringing disease, for taking beaver, for trading with their enemies." He spat into the fire. "Can't really fault their logic. We have brought all those things." This was the moral ambiguity of frontier life laid bare. The mountain men were invaders in a sense, disrupting economies and ecologies that had existed for centuries. Yet they saw themselves as free men pursuing the right to make their way in an open wilderness. "So what do we do if we encounter Blackfoot?" Will asked. "Pray they don't see us first," Harris said bluntly. "If they do, and there's just a few, might be we can talk our way out. I speak enough of their tongue to be polite. If there's many—" He shrugged. "We run, hide, or fight. Not many other options." The casual way he discussed potential death sent a chill through Will that had nothing to do with the mountain air. This was the reality behind the romantic myths. Constant vigilance, knowing that each day might be your last. "Those moccasins I traded for," Harris said, changing the subject. "They're for you. Your boots are falling apart and badly made footwear will kill you faster than most anything else out here." Will accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. The moccasins were beautiful, lined with rabbit fur and beaded with blue and white designs. More importantly, they were sturdy and waterproof, functional art that could save his toes from frostbite. "Thank you," Will said, immediately removing his worn leather boots to try them on. "Don't thank me," Harris grunted. "Thank Two Moons next time. I traded those needles specific for those moccasins. Saw you limping yesterday." The moccasins fit perfectly, as if made for his feet. The comfort compared to his old boots was immediate and dramatic. "How'd they know my size?" Will wondered aloud. Harris chuckled. "They didn't. Crow women make them one size big. You stuff them with grass or rabbit fur till they fit just right." He tossed Will a handful of dried grass. "Here, padding for the toes." Will stuffed the grass into the toes of the moccasins, marvelling at the simple ingenuity of the design. They conformed to his feet, providing support without restriction. No wonder mountain men often adopted native footwear over European styles. "Trading ain't just about goods," Harris said, watching Will adjust his new footwear. "It's about survival. Man alone out here trying to make everything himself. He's dead inside a season. Got to have partners, allies." He gestured to Will's feet. "Those moccasins might save your life when we cross the high passes. Worth more than their weight in beaver pelts." Will nodded. understanding better now. The mountain man wasn't the solitary hero of dime novels conquering the wilderness alone. He was a connector, a cultural bridge between worlds, relying on a network of relationships to survive. "We move camp tomorrow," Harris announced, checking the position of the sun. 2 Moons was right about the snowmelt. This valley's going to flood soon. Need to get to higher ground before the trails turn to mud. Will looked around at the camp he'd grown accustomed to. The lean-to shelters, the established fire pit, the familiar landmarks. The prospect of moving, of starting again somewhere new, filled him with both excitement and apprehension. "Where to?" he asked. Harris pointed west toward a notch between 2 snow-capped peaks. "There's a high valley about 2 days' travel. Good beaver, good hunting, and easier to defend if trouble comes calling." He eyed the sky thoughtfully. "Weather looks fair. We'll pack tonight, head out at first light." Will nodded, already mentally inventorying his meager possessions. In the mountains, a man travelled light or not at all. Everything had to earn its keep, justify the effort of carrying it over difficult terrain. "Oh, those crow," Will said after a moment's reflection. "They're not what I expected." Harris raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "They seemed practical, smart, not like the savages in the stories." Harris spat disgustedly. "Those stories are horse shit, written by men who never set foot west of the Mississippi. Indians ain't savages, and they ain't noble mystics either. They're people, some good, some bad, most just trying to survive, same as us." He fixed Will with a hard stare. "Remember that. Might save your life someday." Will nodded, chastened by the rebuke but appreciating the wisdom behind it. The frontier was teaching him to see clearly, to shed preconceptions that could prove fatal in this unforgiving land. As he began packing for tomorrow's journey, Will reflected on how much he'd already learned. Not just about trapping and trading, but about the complex human geography of the mountains. The wilderness demanded not only physical endurance, but also a kind of social intelligence, knowing who to trust, how to communicate across cultural divides, when to stand firm and when to compromise. These were the true skills of the mountain man, as essential to survival as fire-making or marksmanship. And like those more tangible abilities, they could only be acquired through experience, through trial and error in a landscape where errors were rarely forgiven. Nightfall came as they finished their preparations, transforming the snow-covered valley into a silver landscape under a rising moon. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new territories to navigate. But tonight, with his belly full of traded pemmican and his feet warm in crow moccasins, Will felt a growing confidence in his ability to face whatever the mountains might throw at him. Harris, seasoned by decades in the wilderness, caught his expression and offered a rare smile. "Your learning, Greenhorn," he said, "might make a mountain man of you yet." Coming from him, it was the highest praise imaginable. Will slept soundly that night, dreaming not of civilization's comforts, but of high valleys and beaver streams, of successful trades and new allies in a vast wild land that was slowly becoming home. Dawn broke with a symphony of birdsong. The forest around them stirred to life as Will and Harris finished breaking camp. They'd become efficient at this nomadic routine. Shelters dismantled, fire properly extinguished, all traces of their presence minimized. Not just to leave no trace, but because in these mountains, leaving obvious signs of their passing was like sending an engraved invitation to trouble. "Ready?" Harris asked, securing the last bundle to his pack horse. Will had packed lighter than he thought possible. His entire life now contained in a bedroll, Possible's bag, and a few strategically tied bundles. "Ready," Will confirmed, adjusting his new moccasins. The crow-made footwear already felt like part of his feet, conforming perfectly to every contour. The journey west was arduous, climbing steadily into higher elevations. The trails, if they could be called that, were often little more than game paths winding through dense forest and across rocky slopes. Harris led with the confidence of a man reading a well-marked map, though no such luxury existed. His mental geography, built through years of exploration, guided them through passes and around obstacles invisible to Will's untrained eye. See that notch? Harris pointed to a V-shaped cut between two peaks ahead. That's Thunder Pass. Valley we want is just beyond. Will studied the distant landmark, trying to commit it to memory. Mountain men navigated by such features: distinctive peaks, unusual rock formations, river confluences. In a landscape without signposts, these natural markers were their compass points. By midday, they'd gained significant elevation. The air thinned noticeably, each breath delivering less satisfaction to their lungs. Will fought the urge to pant, knowing it would only waste precious energy. "Hold up," Harris suddenly whispered, raising his hand in the universal sign to stop. Will froze instantly, eyes scanning for danger. Harris pointed silently to a clearing ahead. Through the trees, Will spotted movement, a small herd of elk grazing peacefully, unaware of their presence. His stomach tightened with anticipation. Fresh meat would be a welcome change from jerky and pemmican. With practiced stealth, Harris slipped his rifle from its scabbard. He motioned for Will to stay put, then began a careful stalk toward the clearing. Will watched, mesmerized by his skill. Despite his size and age, Harris moved with remarkable silence, each footstep placed with deliberate care. The led cow suddenly raised her head, nostrils flaring. Harris froze mid-step, becoming part of the landscape. Long seconds passed as the elk surveyed her surroundings. Eventually, satisfied there was no threat, she returned to grazing. Harris continued his approach, using trees for cover, moving only when the wind rustled branches to mask any sound. Will lost sight of him for a moment, then the sharp crack of his rifle shattered the mountain silence. The herd bolted in panic, but one cow stumbled, then collapsed. A clean shot. Harris emerged from the trees, already reloading his Hawken with practiced efficiency. He beckoned Will forward. "That's dinner," he announced with satisfaction as Will reached him, "and breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the next while too." The elk lay still, a small entry wound visible behind her shoulder. A perfect heart shot. Clean, quick, humane. Will had seen Harris pass up shots he wasn't confident in, explaining that wounding an animal that escaped to die slowly was both cruel and wasteful. "Better get to work before the scavengers show up," Harris said, unsheathing his hunting knife. "I'll show you how to break her down proper." What followed was a masterclass in frontier butchery. Harris worked with practiced precision, showing Will exactly where to cut to maximize the usable meat while minimizing waste. "Always thank the animal," he murmured as he began. "Indians got that right. Everything gives its life so something else can live. Least we can do is be grateful and use every part." Will watched carefully as Harris demonstrated how to skin the elk without puncturing the hide, a valuable resource in itself. The hide would become clothing, containers, or trade goods. Nothing would be wasted. "Now you try," Harris said, handing Will his knife and guiding his hands to the proper position. "Firm pressure, but gentle. Follow the natural seams between muscle groups." Will's first cuts were clumsy, but Harris corrected him patiently. "Not so deep there, that's it. Now angle the blade this way to follow the bone." The work was bloody and exhausting, but oddly satisfying. This was sustenance in its most direct form, No middleman, no processing plants, just Will and the animal and the knife. By the time they finished, Will's arms ached and his clothes were stained. But a substantial pile of meat lay ready for processing. Not bad, Harris conceded, inspecting Will's work. Bit rough in spots, but you'll get better. Now for the important part, making it last. Some of the choicest cuts, the tenderloins and backstrap, Harris set aside for immediate cooking. The rest he began to slice into thin strips. Out here, fresh meat's a luxury, he explained. Most of this needs to be preserved. Some will smoke, some will dry, and some, he grinned, will make into pemmican, best trail food ever invented. As Will helped slice the meat, Harris explained the process. Pemmican's simple, but takes work. Dry the meat till it's brittle, pound it to powder, mix with rendered fat and berries if you've got them. Done right, it'll keep for years. Harris instructed Will to gather wood for a smoking rack while he continued processing. By the time Will returned with an armload of green branches, Harris had constructed a simple frame over which the meat strips would be draped. Low heat, lots of smoke, he directed as Will built a fire beneath the rack. Want to dry it, not cook it. As the meat began to smoke, Harris turned his attention to rendering fat. He carefully cut chunks of tallow from around the elk's kidneys, the highest quality fat. This here's the gold, he explained, placing the fat in their camp kettle. Cleanest fat on the animal, melts down smooth, no greasy taste. The process was time-consuming but methodical. While the meat smoked, the fat rendered slowly over a separate small fire, transforming from solid chunks to clear liquid gold. Harris occasionally skimmed impurities from the surface with a wooden spoon. My first winter in the mountains, Harris reminisced as he worked. I damn near starved because I didn't know how to preserve meat proper. Shot a deer, ate what I could, rest spoiled before I knew it. Learned quick after that. The afternoon stretched into evening as the preservation work continued. Harris rotated the meat strips occasionally, ensuring even drying. The smell was intoxicating, smoky, savoury, primal. Company coming, Harris suddenly announced, though Will had heard nothing. Moments later, Will detected the distant sound of horses approaching. His hand moved instinctively toward his rifle. Easy, Harris cautioned. That'll be Jackson's bunch. They trap the next valley over. Sure enough, 3 riders soon appeared on the trail below. They approached openly, hands visible, the frontier etiquette that distinguished friend from foe. As they drew closer, Harris raised a hand in greeting. "About time you showed up," he called. "Thought the Blackfoot might have got you." The lead rider, a weathered man perhaps older than Harris, laughed. "Takes more than Blackfoot to put old Caleb Jackson under. Smelled your smoke from a mile off. Figured it was either you or a forest fire." The men dismounted and Will was introduced to Caleb Jackson and his companions, a taciturn mountain man called Broken Hand Peterson, and a younger trapper not much older than Will, introduced simply as Webb. "My new shadow," Harris said, nodding toward Will, teaching him the ropes. Jackson surveyed Will with calculating eyes. "Hope he's a quick study. Mountains don't suffer slow learners." "He'll do," Harris said, and the simple affirmation filled Will with unexpected pride. The new arrivals unsaddled their horses and made themselves comfortable around the fire. Frontier hospitality demanded sharing food and fire with visitors, a custom born of mutual dependence in a harsh land. "Brought something to wet our whistles," Jackson announced, producing a small jug from his pack. "Missouri whiskey. The real stuff, not that rotgut they sell at Rendezvous." Harris's eyes lit up. Alcohol was a rare luxury in the mountains, carefully rationed and saved for special occasions. "Well, now that changes the complexion of the evening," Harris said. Jackson passed the jug, and each man took a modest swig. Even in celebration, wasting precious spirits was foolish. When the jug reached Will, he took a cautious sip. The whiskey burned like liquid fire, but spread a welcome warmth through his tired body. As night fell, they feasted on fresh elk meat, roasted simply over the fire. The conversation flowed as freely as circumstances allowed, with news exchanged and stories shared. These informal gatherings were the mountain man's newspaper, post office, and social club combined. Heard the American Fur Company's offering $5 a pelt this season, Webb mentioned between bites. Beaver's getting scarce. $5 won't matter if you can't get your furs to market, Peterson countered in his gravelly voice. Blackfoot's been hitting the supply trains hard. 3 outfits ambushed last month. This sparked a discussion of routes and danger zones, information more valuable than gold in the mountains. Will listened intently, mentally mapping safe passages and areas to avoid. As the meal concluded, Harris returned to the task of pemmican making. The dried meat, now brittle as old leather, was ready for the next step. He placed portions in a clean hide, then demonstrated how to use a smooth river stone as a hammer, pounding the meat into fine powder. "Your turn," he said, handing Will the stone. "Arm will feel like it's falling off before you're done, but that's the price of eating through winter." Will set to work, pounding rhythmically. The physical labour was indeed exhausting, but there was something meditative about the repetitive motion. Jackson watched with approval. "Making pemmican, eh? Smart. Saved my life more than once." He rolled up his sleeve to reveal a gnarled scar on his forearm. "Winter of 29, over on the Yellowstone. Me and old Pierre Laird got caught in a blizzard that'd freeze the hair off a buffalo. No shelter except what we could make. No food except what little pemmican we had left." These casual references to near-death experiences were common among mountain men. Survival stories weren't told for dramatic effect, but as practical lessons. This worked, this didn't. Here's how to live if it happens to you. 3 days that storm howled, Jackson continued. Snow so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Built a snow cave just big enough for 2 men and a small fire. Took turns staying awake to keep that flame alive. Let it die, we'd have died with it. He described their gradual weakening as supplies dwindled. The growing likelihood that neither would survive to see clear weather. 4th morning, Pierre doesn't wake up. Just slipped away in his sleep, peaceful-like. Too cold, too hungry, too tired to go on. The matter-of-fact description of his companion's death carried more emotional weight than any dramatic rendering could achieve. This was the mountain reality. Men died, often alone or witnessed only by equally helpless companions. No ceremony, no marked graves, just the wilderness reclaiming its own. Had to keep moving after that, Jackson continued. Knew if I stayed put, I'd follow Pierre quick enough. Started walking. No real idea which direction except downhill, figuring any valley might have game or shelter. His salvation came in the form of a hot spring, one of the geothermal features scattered throughout the greater Yellowstone region. The warmth kept a small area free of snow, attracting game and offering the barest margin of survival until the storm broke. Lived 6 days by that spring, eating whatever came to drink and keeping warm in the steam. Strangest thing, spring had minerals in it, turned my skin and hair red as a fox. Crow hunting party found me eventually. Thought I was some kind of spirit with my red skin and half-starved look. Treated me gentle because of it, nursed me back instead of taking my hair. The story concluded not with triumph, but with humble acknowledgement of the fine margins between survival and death. Wasn't skill saved me, Jackson said. Was luck plain and simple. Mountains don't care how good a trapper you are when they decide to test you. Other stories followed. Harris contributed an account of navigating through dense fog using only the sound of distant waterfalls as guidance. Frenchie described encountering a grizzly bear that ignored him completely, focused instead on gorging on berries before hibernation. Will listened, absorbing not just the entertainment value but the embedded lessons. Each tale contained practical wisdom, techniques that worked, mistakes to avoid, signs to watch for. This was the mountain man's true education, passed from veteran to greenhorn through narratives that engaged both emotion and intellect. Eventually, as the fire burned lower and eyelids grew heavy, the visitors prepared to depart. Night travel was dangerous but sometimes necessary. With clear skies and a nearly full moon, the risk was acceptable for experienced men. "Appreciates the company," Harris said as they donned snowshoes at the cabin door. "Needed some new voices besides this youngster's." Jackson chuckled. "He's coming along, though. Got the look now. Not so green anymore." He studied Will appraisingly. Might make a proper mountain man by spring. The compliment, casual as it was, warmed Will more effectively than the fire. Acceptance by these veterans represented a transition from tolerated novice to recognized, if junior, member of their exclusive brotherhood. After the visitors departed, Will and Harris prepared for sleep. The cabin had cooled with the doors opening, and Will built up the fire to last through the night. Outside, the temperature continued its relentless drop. Winter in the high country was beautiful but merciless. The stars brilliant in the thin air, the snow transformed into diamond dust in the moonlight, and beneath this beauty, cold that could kill within hours. "Good men," Harris commented as he settled into his bedroll. Fitzgerald especially, one of the few from the old days still breathing. "How long has he been in the mountains?" Will asked. "Since 16 or thereabouts. Was with Ashley's first expedition up the Missouri. Survived the Arikara attack that killed a dozen others." Harris tamped out his pipe thoughtfully. "Mountains have tried to kill him 100 different ways. So far, he's outsmarted them." The casual reference to such longevity gave Will pause. In the trapping profession, a man who survived 10 years was considered fortunate. Many didn't last their first winter. What's the secret, Will wondered aloud, to lasting so long out here? Harris considered the question seriously. "Luck plays its part," he acknowledged. "Being in the wrong place at the wrong time can kill even the most skilled. But beyond luck..." He paused, organizing his thoughts. 3 things, I'd say. Knowledge, gained through experience and listening to those who've gone before. Adaptability, rigid men break when the mountains bend them. And community, lone wolves die alone when trouble finds them. It was one of the longest philosophical discourses Will had heard from him, revealing the depth of thought beneath his practical exterior. Mountain men were often portrayed as unthinking brutes in Eastern newspapers, but the reality was far different. Survival in this environment required not just physical toughness, but intellectual flexibility and emotional resilience. "Get some sleep," Harris advised, ending this conversation in his typical abrupt manner. "Tomorrow we check the north traps. Long day ahead." Sleep came easily despite the cold that seeped through even the well-constructed cabin walls. Will's body had adapted to these conditions, developing a remarkable ability to generate heat through the night. The buffalo robes and wool blankets that seemed inadequate months ago now created a cocoon of sufficient warmth. Morning arrived with new snow, 6 fresh inches transforming the landscape once again. After a breakfast of venison, hardtack, and coffee, they both prepared for the day's expedition to the distant trap line. Take extra gear, Harris advised. Weather feels changeable, might need to shelter if it turns. This precaution, packing for potential emergency, had become second nature. In the mountains, conditions could shift from clear to life-threatening within hours. The prepared survived, the complacent perished. The journey to the North Traps took them through the most beautiful terrain Will had yet experienced. Pristine meadows where snow lay unmarked except for occasional wildlife tracks. Forests where laden branches created natural archways. Ridges offering spectacular views of snow-covered peaks marching to the horizon. Never gets old, Harris commented, noticing Will's appreciation of the scenery. Been looking at these mountains 30 years, still find new beauty every day. It was a rare poetic sentiment from a man usually focused on practical concerns. Winter in the high country affected men differently. Some grew depressed and restless in the confinement, while others found a deeper connection to the landscape in its stark elemental power. The trapline yielded modest success. 3 beaver and a marten, their fur prime with winter thickness. Harris examined each pelt with expert assessment. Good colour on this one, he noted, of a particularly dark beaver. Fetch top price come rendezvous. London buyers pay extra for the dark ones. Fashion changes, but dark furs always in demand. Such considerations might seem distant in this remote wilderness, but the connection was real. The mountain trapper was part of a global economic system, his labour transformed into luxury goods for wealthy Europeans and Easterners he would never meet. The irony wasn't lost on most mountain men that they, living with minimal possessions in nature's harshest environment, supported the excesses of urban wealth through their dangerous work. The return journey brought the weather change Harris predicted. Not a blizzard, but steady snow that reduced visibility and covered their outbound tracks. They navigated by landmark and compass sense. The lessons of previous months now applied in genuine conditions. Back at the cabin by mid-afternoon, they processed the day's take, skinning, fleshing, and stretching the pelts on willow hoops. The work was precise, requiring full attention despite cold, numbed fingers. A poorly prepared hide meant wasted effort and lost value, unacceptable in the mountain economy where each pelt represented days of dangerous labour. Evening brought another ritual, equipment maintenance by firelight. Harris demonstrated the proper care of steel traps, showing how to keep them functioning in sub-zero temperatures. Oil freezes, he explained, working a trap's mechanism with practiced hands. Use rendered fat instead. Stays soft in the cold. Such specialized knowledge, modified techniques for extreme conditions, separated successful mountain men from those who failed to adapt. Standard practices that worked in milder climates often proved useless or actively dangerous in the high country winter. As the evening deepened toward night, Harris surprised Will by producing a small cloth-wrapped package from his personal stores. Inside was a carefully preserved treasure, dried apples, a luxury almost beyond imagining in the winter wilderness. Christmas, he explained briefly, or close enough. Lost track of the exact date, but should be around now. The simple celebration, shared dried fruit and an extra ration of coffee, touched Will unexpectedly. In this moment of small comfort, he realized how far he'd come from the measured abundance of civilization. What once would have seemed pitiful now represented genuine luxury, a moment of pleasure carved from an existence defined largely by necessity. To surviving winter, Harris offered, raising his tin cup in a rare toast. To surviving winter, Will echoed, savouring the sweet tart flavour of fruit that connected him, however tenuously, to orchards and summer and a world beyond endless snow. Later, as Will banked the fire for the night, Harris spoke of spring, not with impatience, but with the calm acceptance of nature's cycles that characterized the mountain man's worldview. "Come March, we'll start seeing signs," he said. "Longer days first, then new bird calls. Snow crust that bears weight in morning but not afternoon." He described the progression with the precision of long observation. "By April, beaver will be moving again. That's when the good trapping returns." The mental calendar stretched before Will, not days marked on paper, but natural indicators of seasonal change. This was how humans had measured time for millennia, before clocks and calendars imposed artificial regularity on the organic flow of the natural world. Sleep approached as the fire settled to coals, casting a dim red glow through the cabin's interior. Outside, the snow continued falling, insulating the cabin in deepening silence. The wilderness in winter had its own particular sound, not true silence, but a hushed quality that seemed to absorb noise rather than transmit it. Harris was already breathing the deep rhythm of sleep, his body's clock aligned with darkness and light rather than arbitrary hours. Will's own consciousness began to drift, thoughts becoming less linear, more dreamlike. In this half-waking state, he reflected on the journey that brought him here. Not just the physical travel from east to west, but the internal transformation from civilized tenderfoot to emerging mountain man. The change wasn't complete. He still had much to learn, skills to perfect, knowledge to absorb. But the foundation was laid, the direction established. The mountains had tested him, and so far found him adequate to their challenges. There would be harder tests ahead: spring flooding, potential encounters with hostile tribes, the myriad dangers that made the trapper's life so precarious. But Will faced these prospects now not with fear, but with growing confidence, the quiet assurance that came from survived hardship. Outside, an owl called, 3 soft notes that seemed to emphasize rather than break the winter silence. Somewhere distant, perhaps on the next ridge, a wolf answered. These night sounds, once alien and frightening, had become a familiar lullaby, the natural chorus of the wilderness night. Will's mind continued its gentle drift towards sleep, the boundary between consciousness and dreams growing less distinct. Images flowed behind his closed eyelids, sunlight on fresh snow, the graceful arc of a hunting hawk, Harris demonstrating some fine point of wilderness craft, the glowing eyes of the mountain lion reflected in firelight. This was how the mountain man slept, not in absolute security, but in harmony with a world both beautiful and dangerous. The wilderness was not conquered. No human could claim such mastery. But perhaps a truce had been established, a mutual respect between the mountains and those hardy enough to dwell among them. As sleep claimed Will completely, his last awareness was of warmth beneath buffalo robes, the faint glow of banked coals, and the steady sound of falling snow, a mountain lullaby as old as time itself. Unlike modern beds with their manufactured comfort, this wilderness sleep had been truly earned through labour, through learning, through respect for the unforgiving land that both threatened and sustained. Perhaps that's why it felt so profound, so deeply satisfying as consciousness faded into dream. The mountain winter continued outside, indifferent to human concerns, beautiful in its stark power. But within the shelter built by human hands, guided by knowledge passed through generations of mountain men, Will rested secure, a small victory of adaptation and endurance, in a land where such victories were never permanent, always to be earned anew with each rising sun. In the realm between sleep and waking, Will found himself thinking of those who would never know this life, the comfortable citizens of eastern cities who slept in soft beds, protected by walls and laws and the accumulated cushions of civilization. They lived safer lives, certainly, but did they live more deeply? Did they know the satisfaction of skills hard won, of challenges overcome through wit and endurance rather than wealth and privilege? The mountain man's world was harsh, unforgiving, often cruel. Men died young, alone, forgotten by history. Yet those who survived found something precious in the struggle, a connection to the fundamental forces that shaped human existence, a clarity of purpose that came from direct confrontation with necessity. Will Green, once a soft Easterner seeking adventure and fortune, now understood why men like Harris chose this life despite its costs. There was honour in the struggle, dignity in the adaptation, beauty in the terrible honesty of survival. The mountains stripped away pretense, revealed character, tested every assumption about strength and weakness, success and failure. As sleep finally claimed him completely, Will's dreams were filled with visions of spring, rushing waters, green meadows, the return of birds, and the promise of another season's work in this magnificent, merciless land. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he would meet them as a mountain man, shaped by the wilderness into something harder and perhaps truer than what he had been before. The wilderness may have receded in later years, transformed by time and progress, but something of the mountain man's spirit remained in the wild places they explored, in the trails they blazed, in the stories they left behind. Their world of pristine landscapes and primal challenges had vanished, but their lessons endured. Patience to endure, knowledge to adapt, courage to face each day's demands with quiet determination. These qualities served the frontiersmen well in their wilderness struggles. They serve still in different but no less demanding circumstances, connecting the past to the present through the timeless human capacity for resilience, for learning, for finding meaning in the face of uncertainty. The mountain man's legacy wasn't written in history books or commemorated in monuments. It lived in the understanding that strength comes not from conquering nature, but from learning to live within its rhythms, that wisdom comes from experience honestly earned, and that the deepest satisfaction comes from meeting life's challenges with skill, courage, and respect for the forces beyond human control. In his dreams that night, Will Green embodied this legacy, carrying forward the hard-won knowledge of men like Moses Harris into an uncertain future, prepared to face whatever trials awaited with the mountain man's greatest gifts: adaptability, patience, and the quiet confidence that came from having survived in the beautiful, unforgiving embrace of the American wilderness.